In your wanderings, you stumble upon a ruined temple buried deep within the heart of the forest. Wary, you continue on through thick overgrowth until you see a clearing that was once an ancient cathedral built by people, now rebuilt by nature itself. In the center is a preserved altar, stacked with various dice of all shapes and colors. As you contemplate what this means, a cloaked figure approaches from the shadows.
Welcome, brave adventurer. Have you come to roll the dice? Explore strange new worlds with new strange rules? If you seek adventure worthy of being shared with good friends, you have come to the right place. Just roll for initiative.
Welcome to the Nat One Nerds podcast. Welcome to the podcast, everyone.
Hey, guys, this is Nat One Nerds, and we're here with you with a brand new system.
Yes, we have finally branched ourselves beyond Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition.
Felt like leaving home for the first time.
We're leaving the nest.
So, in this venture from the Dragon's Nest, we ended up going to Fate Accelerated. It was definitely an interesting segue from Dungeons & Dragons. It's a very different system.
It is a very different system, and I think we both agree that the biggest difference between the two is that Dungeons & Dragons is pretty heavily combat-oriented, while Fate Accelerated is much more geared toward the role-playing.
Yeah. So, but before we get into that, how did you hear about the Fate Accelerated system?
So, the Fate Accelerated system was the system I wanted to try right after Dungeons & Dragons, just because I had actually been introduced to the system via another podcast. And listening to that podcast, I could tell that these guys were having so much fun. It seemed really interesting. And because unlike Dungeons & Dragons, where so much of the mechanics are combat-oriented, the mechanics themselves in Fate Accelerated are geared toward actually pushing you to roleplay.
Yeah.
Because with Dungeons & Dragons, you kind of have to figure out the role-playing aspect kind of by yourself and have to rely on having a good group and a good dungeon master to help bring that in. While Fate Accelerated and the whole Fate system in general has mechanics that already do that for you. Like, they really, here's how to do things. The role-playing becomes not pushed down your throat by any means. You can still play whatever kind of character you want, but it definitely has that nudging, if you will, to help with that role-playing more.
Yeah, what did you say was the name of that podcast that you heard about Fate from?
So the podcast that I heard about the system from is called Improv Tabletop, and they have just the most interesting and wacky mini Fate Accelerated campaigns, and they have an absolute blast doing it. So,
I mean, that's always the most important part of any game, is that everyone's having fun, right?
Yeah, if nobody's having fun at the table, then it's a fail of a system. So
yeah, that's pretty safe to say.
Yeah.
But with going to a whole new system, it meant a whole lot of reading. So we had to read through their entire, 40-page pamphlet. That's one thing that's really nice about Fate that I've learned, is they have Fate Core, which is like the size of a normal tabletop role-playing game source book, a couple hundred pages of all sorts of goodies. Then they have Fate Accelerated, which is a variation of the system that we used. And that it's literally a pamphlet that's 40 pages. I have it in front of me. It's so small. It's so simple, easy to digest. My first impression was that was really nice with learning a new system. Mm-hmm. Because having only ever played 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, learning an entire new system from scratch was kind of daunting. But I feel like this was the perfect one to branch into first because they made it so easy.
It's a pretty simple system compared to Dungeons & Dragons. And the Fate Accelerated is even a further simplification of that system that is perfect for not only people branching out into new tabletop role-playing games and role-playing systems, but is also just a fantastic system, in my opinion, for anybody just wanting to get into tabletop role-playing systems for the very first time ever. Whether you had played Dungeons & Dragons or Pathfinder or whatever before, it's a great system, as Brandon was saying, to not only branch out into, but to start from too.
Oh, yeah. And one thing that, in my first impression, that I loved about Fate is they have such an amazing, coherent system for role-playing, which was a breath of fresh air from 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. As you guys probably remember from our previous podcasts, that was the one thing that I really reamed D&D for, was they had no structure, no rules or anything for role-playing. It was literally just, good luck, have fun, go role-play.
Yeah, the most you got from Dungeons & Dragons, at least with 5th edition, was you would have occasional, like, character classes that had a little bit of flavor to them, like a paladin, for instance, where the paladin, if you break your oath, because that's what paladins, that's their whole class, is these people that make an oath to some kind of deity, and they serve that deity through righteous judgment and executions. Not actual executions or whatnot, but you know what I mean.
I mean, sometimes executions.
Sometimes executions, but you in a general sense, just executing just general action on the deity's behalf. And with paladins, if you break your oath, then the dungeon master can, for lack of a better term, kind of start threatening or warning that you're going to turn into an oathbreaker paladin. And that's essentially the evilest paladin you can be. So role-playing as a paladin in Dungeons & Dragons, in that sense, there is some kind of very basic general mechanic, more or less, to help with that role-playing. And then there's some flavor spells to kind of make it more fun. But yeah, as you were saying, there's no real core mechanics to push that role-playing through. It's just reliance on where a role-playing system, the end. So,
like, outside of charisma, there's nothing really for role-playing in D&D. It's like they built the whole system for combat and then just said, here, you can use your combat stuff outside of combat, but we're here for the combat. Mm-hmm. Which some people are not all there for that. And with Fate, it honestly felt like the exact opposite to me, where they built the entire system around the role-playing. Instead of the normal stats that you have in Dungeons & Dragons, you have what's called approaches, which is basically their version of the stats. And that's things such as there's careful, clever, flashy, forceful, quick, and sneaky. None of those are anything you can really use in combat traditionally. It's all like aspects of your character and how they are. How clever are they? How flashy are they? Do they like to be the center of attention? Are they quick and sneaky? Are they a strong, forceful person? Are they very careful and calculating? Mm-hmm. And those approaches help to really hone in your role-playing aspect of the game, which is nice.
Because those approaches can be used both inside and outside of encounters of Fate. And you use those throughout. Unlike D&D, where your stats definitely shine, in particular in certain aspects, but in other aspects, they kind of just start falling flat a little bit.
Yeah.
So your strength shines best in combat when you're a martial character using martial weapons.
But that kind of brings me to what also in my initial impression was the biggest crutch of Fate Accelerated, was their roleplay was fantastic, but since the system was built around roleplay, I felt like the combat was a little weak. Meaning, because everything's all built around these approaches and you don't have actual stats, and there's no actual system really for equipment in Fate, I was really intrigued by how combat would work, because without those systems, a seasoned war hero with an ancient legendary magical sword would be just as effective in combat as a bard yelling insults. Like, very loose and unstructured when it comes to the actual, it's just encounters, it's not even really combat, because it's all about that role-playing and environment. They don't even have, like, really strict movement or anything, you just use zones in the encounters.
Yeah, because in Fate Accelerated, they really push for encounters to not automatically be physical. In Dungeons & Dragons, it's very traditional to have most encounters be physical-oriented encounters.
Which is kind of nice, though, being able to have diplomatic encounters, because in D&D, you basically roleplay them, and the DM just kind of decides how it works out. But in Fate, if you have an encounter where you don't want to fight and you want to actually try to intelligently work your way through something, they actually have a system for it, which is really nice, because if instead of hit points like in D&D or health, you have stress points. And that's just kind of how willing you are to continue in the confrontation. And so you can just wear someone down to the point where they're willing to give in instead of having to beat them down.
Or just straight up kill them, like
Yeah.
in most encounters in D&D.
Dang murder hobos.
I know. Which is probably what is encouraging murder hobos to continue springing up throughout all the editions of D&D.
This is fair. But I feel like that was a lot of mine. What were your first impressions of Fate Accelerated?
Kind of as I was mentioning before, listening to Improv Tabletop, they had such a fun time. Now, the people that do Improv Tabletop have background in theater. Almost all of them have a background in theater. They have background in improv. And so they really get into Fate Accelerated really heavily, and they show just how fun it can be. Because in Dungeons & Dragons, it's pretty much almost, I would say 90% of the time, it's always fantasy-based. And it's usually kind of this medieval, at most, like Eberron, where it's kind of more of a steampunky industrial revolution. But there's still those fantasy kind of medievalish elements to it.
Yeah.
With Fate Accelerated, you can truly be in any place at any time and have it work smoothly.
Yeah, it's meant to be very freeform. So, like, as I was mentioning before, you could be this seasoned warrior wielding the ancient blade Excalibur or whatever, or you could be a kid with telekinetic superpowers that uses paper airplanes, or you could be an accountant in, like, modern day New York. Like, you can be literally anything you want in Fate, which is a really nice part of how unstructured it is.
With Dungeons & Dragons, the mechanics can definitely be very rigid, and there's a purpose to that for sure.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why Dungeons & Dragons is, for all purposes, the most popular and well-known tabletop role-playing system out there. But Fate Accelerated is definitely a lot more flexible and smooth because it's perfect for, people that love improv. If you love improv, this is even more of a perfect system for you. Now, do you have to be like super into improv to enjoy Fate Accelerated? Absolutely not. I wouldn't consider myself an improv person, but I am comfortable enough with the occasional on-the-spot scenarios that I can enjoy this system.
Yeah. If I had to describe the difference between the two systems, the best way I could put it is D&D is structured almost like a video game you play on your tabletop. Fate Accelerated is the equivalent of you getting together with your friends and just going on an adventure together through storytelling.
Yeah, it's literally almost like a tabletop role-playing system for the people that, instead of doing it on stage, do it around their kitchen table.
Yep. And I think that's how all these systems come about. I honestly don't know what the original, if you can say there was an original tabletop role-playing game is, because those have been around for, I'm sure, as long as humans have. We've always had imaginations and fantasies. But it's nice to see that everyone has different flavors and tastes, and because of that, they come up with so many different unique systems, like Fate and D&D or Call of Cthulhu. Like, depending on what people want, they can build a system for that. What makes that even better is if you, say, are not a huge fan of one system, there's going to be one that can work for you.
Yeah.
Like, if you're not a fan of the combat in D&D, or you like to be able to do fun, tricksy things instead of just fighting stuff, I'm sure you would love Fate. Fate is great.
Yeah. Especially the Fate Accelerated version. So,
yeah.
Because in these episodes, we're going to be talking about Fate Accelerated specifically, and we do have plans to come back to the core system of Fate in general.
We have a lot of stuff to cover, but it's something that we eventually want to hit because we enjoyed Fate Accelerated enough. We want to try out the core game.
Yeah, for sure. Overall, our impressions are good. We're very excited for this system. We're excited to learn more about it and to try it out for the first time. Hopefully this was a good introduction for everybody into the system and give you a good overall impression.
Yeah, we still have a lot to cover in the rest of our episodes, with things like character creation, running an adventure. We'll, of course, be doing one ourselves with a one-shot. We even have a little bit of a surprise for when we play later. We're going to be working with Improv Tabletop, which is the one Park has been mentioning. They've been so gracious to help us out with that one-shot and give us a little more experience to our podcast.
Absolutely. So they will be joining us for the character creation episode and our one-shot episode, where Christian Randall from Improv Tabletop will be joining us as the Game Master. And then Ned Wilcock, who is the usual Game Master for Improv Tabletop, will be joining me and Brandon as one of the player characters.
This is very helpful considering that neither of us have actually played Fate Accelerated before. So it'll be nice having some people with a little bit more time under their belts helping us out.
Yes, and I can't express how excited I am to have Christian and Ned, because I've been a huge fan of them for quite a long time. So I'm very excited to be able to have this opportunity with them. And we hope you guys will continue to join us in exploring the Fate Accelerated system.
Yeah. We'll see you guys when we come back for Fate. This is Nat One Nerds signing out. Thanks so much for stopping by, everyone. This is Nat One Nerds Podcast. I'm Brandon.
I'm Parker.
And we really appreciate you guys stopping by to take some time and hang out with us and listen to our thoughts on the system.
If you want to hear more from us, we're on Spotify, Stitcher, Google Podcast, and Amazon Music currently.
And if you want to reach out to us, we'd love to hear from you on our social media. We have both Facebook and Instagram, and that is at Nat1NerdsPodcast. And we even have an email with Nat1NerdsPodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear your comments, complaints, what you think about the current systems, ideas for new systems. If you want to say hello, anything, we'd love to hear from you guys. This is Nat One Nerds Podcast, signing out.
Happy rolling.